Hi, everybody. I was planning on doing this from the Beckett property, but I got oil change today, and it took a lot longer than it was supposed to. So I am doing it from the car. So today we have one of the questions we had was about the mat, the rolling like a ball in the mat. Okay, let me see if I can add you here. Okay, let's see here. How do I do this? Wave into everybody as they come in. Okay, let me see. Hmm. Again, I think you need to ask to join, and then I can let you in, I think. Let me see. Maybe not. Let me see. No. There we go. Okay, so let's wait a second. But there's a couple other questions as well. If we have time, I'll get to them. If not, we can always add it later. Okay. There you
Hi.
are. Hey, how are you?
Hi, good. And you? How are you?
I'm very well.
Great to see
So,
you
yeah,
again.
it's good to see you too. So you had some questions about the rolling like a ball, correct?
Yes, the rolling like a ball. Because as I've sent you the questions, in Return to Life, it is called rolling back. And I was
Mm-hmm.
curious when and who and why has it renamed into rolling like a ball?
Well, I can tell you that in the notes from Jacob's Pillow when he taught the math class there, it wasn't called either of those names. It was called rock.
Rock.
That's all it was called. So like rocking.
Like,
So it was just called rock.
okay.
And the directions were what she wrote down was, feet off the mat, grasp the wrists, roll back 10 times, chin in always. That's it.
Okay.
So it's much different. So basically, if anybody was probably Romana because you're supposed to be like a tight ball,
Mhm.
and that's the difference. Now, there's classically, you have a number of different variations when you go to teach. You can grab the ankles, you can grab the shins, you can grab, all the way around. It depends on the person because not everybody has the ability to grab their ankles because they may have a belly in the way. That doesn't mean you still can't do the rocking. And matter of fact, in the book that I wrote with Romana, the Pilates Method of Body Conditioning, that was one of the exercises that we left out because I felt, and I still feel this, is that if somebody doesn't have a flexible spine and you teach that, and if you've been teaching for a while, you've seen it. Somebody starts to roll and then they just plop down and they
Mhm.
can't go anywhere because the spine is too stiff and straight, so they don't have that mobility. So it's not something I left it out because I didn't want people to have a book to where they were going to do that, even though Joe did it. I left it out because the book that we had was basic and it had a lot of other apparatus and other things that they could do. So you didn't have to do the rolling like a ball, and there was ways to get there, in a different way. But that being said, when you look at the exercise itself, sometimes you put your hands behind the knees and you round back, and then you roll in the ability that you can. It's always modifiable depending on the person. But when you look at the thing to remember is when you look at Return to Life and Joe doing the exercises, that's the full manifestation of the exercise. That's like the best that it can be, right? And majority of people, if they're returning to life, they're not anywhere close to that. They have to start and do a lot more to get their spines flexible and strong, right? It's the stability before the mobility, but then you have to still get the mobility. So you have to slowly progress that and open it up.
So basically, that's the difference between archival and classical.
Well,
The
well,
archival
no,
would be
there's a lot more. Again, remember in archival, there's a lot of different variations. I mean, because the notes from the student in the early 40s, that's still archival. I mean, it's not Joe writing it down, but it's somebody who took his class and wrote down. And again, it's if you take a class, you don't necessarily write down exactly what the teacher said. You may write down and she also did it in um, shorthand. So it may have been a variation on the theme, but it's still archival because it's from the 40s. I mean, and it was based on what Joe taught. Now, Joe specific in Return to Life, if you look at how he said, what he talks about, you're supposed to grab and squeeze the legs. You're not grabbing the ankles like Romana did, but what's the variation? Most people can't do it that way in the beginning because they don't understand it. So you have to modify it. And a lot of what Romana did, is that if she modified it, was either because, people really had trouble doing it. And there's even a letter to the publisher and the publisher returned the letter, basically saying, somebody was asking them to redo Joe's book, and they basically said, it appeared that a lot of people had trouble doing his exercises the way he'd had it written because they were, he'd expect you to do it right away, and most people wouldn't follow his directions, which is you do one exercise and you have to do it very well before you move on to the next exercise. Well, if you're not doing that, and most people wouldn't do that because it's like you're only going to be able to do one or two exercises, and then you have to do that for a couple of weeks and start to get better, and then you add another exercise and you have to get good at that exercise. That's very slow for most people. Most people are too impatient for that. So that's one of the things that I think is what Romana did. And again, I don't know if it was Romana. It could have been maybe she learned it from Corolla when she worked with Corolla. Maybe she learned it from Clara later. Maybe they changed it. It's not clear who changed it and when, and it could have been changed by Joe because, remember, Return to Life was written in 1945 and it was reissued in 1960, and there are some changes. So he didn't change it much, or because he had the opportunity to, and he didn't really change it that much. And so, and then again, he died in 67. So in that 7 years from when it was republished to when he passed away, maybe he changed it, but it could also been, Romana and Clara or Romana over the years. We don't know for sure. I mean, one of the things about his history is that when life's happening, right? Like right now, your clients don't come to you, and go, what about this? And why'd you, they don't always ask those questions. And back then you didn't ask, they weren't asked. So we didn't know to ask them, but now we have those questions.
Yeah, that's right. Okay.
So let me see here if anybody else, I'm seeing everybody's joining in. I just have to see if anybody, so does anybody else, did I answer your question for you?
Yeah, I still got like 1,000 more, but
well,
for now it's okay.
Well, I mean, the reality is that, there's Return to Life, there's, the bench mat stuff, there is different things that you do. And so, putting it together, what you really need to do, and it is about, what's your client? What does the client need? What do you need? And doing what you need. And if you need to modify, you modify. I mean, that's the reality of classical, and that's the reality of what Joe taught. It wasn't like you just, do the exact same thing no matter what, because if you look at his exercises, you can't just come in and start doing some of the, like, can you do STAR your first day? It's not a reality. It's not something that you can do. You have to do things where, you do it over, I have to pull up a little bit here because I need to get in the shade. You do it in a way that they're able to do it. And what is that for that person or you? And that's going to be different for everybody. You're going to have to modify it and adjust it for that. And that's how the system works. And, Romana did change things from what, but most of the time when she changed things, at least my understanding, and I worked with her, one-on-one, developing, well, it wasn't one-on-one. We had a lot of other input and other people, but we worked very closely together, to set up the classical, what's called classical, because that was the manual, that was the training. And, she did change some things, but she changed it, my understanding is, for two reasons. Main reason was safety. And, over time, if something happened, she changed the exercise, or if it was difficult. The other one was, when she went to purchase, especially for the mat, and started teaching in a university setting, you have to remember that the university setting, when you have a class, it's not a half hour. it's usually an hour and 15 minutes. That's how it's set up. So she had to be able to expand and do things. So the wall units were not developed by Joe. They were developed at SUNY Purchase so that they could teach a mat class. And because you had a wall unit with a push-through bar and the leg springs and the arm springs, you could do a lot of the other exercises that you would do on the Cadillac in the classroom setting, because there was a whole row of wall units in the studio that they were, so when they had class, the students would come and they would do the mat, and then they would, and she increased some of the exercises and added it. One of the things that in the training that we do, and in the manual, the second manual we did, what exercises she changed, because she wanted to use all of the Joe pictures for the mat in the manual, but there were other exercises. So the other exercises that are in my manual that are for the mat, we know that she added because they weren't with Joe. So,
okay.
Some of the side kick variations and all that, there's a number of things that she added and modified, and made it different. So, yep.
How many people were there while the mat classes that she taught?
Where? I mean, at Purchase? I don't know the exact number, but it wasn't, huge. I mean, it was for the dance program, and the studio, I think, held, I have to try to remember how many wall units there were. At least it was either 6 or 8, I think, but I'm not really sure. It wasn't huge. And if you look, we know, when he taught mat class at Jacob's Pillow, there was maybe about 15 to 20. I never really sat down and counted them all, but that we can see that, there's about 15 to 20. But and they were dancers, and it's interesting because, when the dancers you see the dancers doing the mat workout, and they have trouble, right? And so if dancers are, and again, they were young, they were, training to be dancers. They weren't the professional dancers at Jacobs. This was the students that he taught. So they were still training, but they were young. So, I mean, if you have an 18 to 20, some-year-old, person doing the mat exercises compared to somebody that's 60 or 70, well, hopefully the 18-year-old can do it, has a lot more flexibility and strength and everything else than this 50 or 60 who's never done any exercises or anything like that, which is, what could happen for sure. And that's what happens all the time. I mean, if you look at the majority of people who come and do Pilates, they're not 18. If they're dancers, if you're in I had my PT practice and Pilates practice was for performers. So I had a lot of dancers. I had people, some of the people like, perfect example, Shari Berkowitz, she was in my PT clinic, and that's how she got into Pilates, because I had Pilates connected to my PT clinic. And a lot of other people as well, that, started either in PT or in that way, and then and got Pilates with their PT, and then they got interested in Pilates. So that kind of thing happens all the time, but they're not necessarily going to be doing the same work, right?
Do you think, Sean, it would be possible for you to do maybe a webinar like the one that like the one about Carola, something that we will have to pay for, about the changes that Romana did? Because at the last webinar you said that Romana told you exactly which changes she made, and I'm really interested into that. And I think,
well, I mean,
it's a huge topic.
I usually that's what you get when you do the certification or the bridge program.
Okay.
I mean, that's really what that's about. I'm happy. I share it, but it's about training, because to just know what she trained. I mean, if you want to do that, I understand. Maybe I'll talk to Elaine and see if that's something if we can do. That's a possibility for sure. But I mean, usually that's. I'm more than willing to answer lots of questions, but I'm not going to be answering the whole certification questions and things like that for this, and this is more for, if you have specific questions about anything and I can try to answer it like I just did, I'm happy to do that.
Okay. Thank you.
And, maybe we can do something like that. We'll see. Cause, I just want to help people out. And I know that there's lots of people have lots of questions. I get asked all the time. And not everybody is wants to go online to do that. So, that's why I'm like, if you want to DM me, you can. There's lots of different ways to get the information. And am I 100% right? Never. Nobody is, right? But I have a history and I have an experience of with Romana for, hand in hand, basically for 13 years, building